Hey guys, welcome to another poker vlog. Today we are playing a freeze out tournament, and honestly not one of my best runs. Just sticking around in pots trying to get lucky on turns or rivers, and I'm not really happy with it, to be honest, but I wanted to keep it on the channel to show that I can always make wrong plays, and sometimes you can just have days where you're just not on it. And so hopefully y'all like the video. And if y'all have any comments on how you think I played a hand, please comment them. I love reading them. And without further ado, let's get to the video. Looking at the first hand of this video, we look down at Queen 10 offsuit in the under the gun 1 position. So I've really been trying to work on my raise openings whenever I'm given my hands an early position. Queen 10, if it was suited, I would feel more comfortable raising maybe 2x or 2.5. But I decided just on a call. At this point, I got to the tournament a little late, so I'm still trying to figure out how my table is playing. And it ends up folding around to the button who called, and then the small blind actually raises it up to 2300. So I decide to call. I think this is up for debate on whether or not I should be calling in this situation, but with the small blind raising, I felt like it was worth calling. Maybe he was trying to best out of it and just take down the blinds. But anyways, I called and the button called as well. And the flop is ace 6-5 with 2 spades. After a lot of thinking about it, the small blind decides to check, and it actually ends up checking around, especially since I missed this flop. The turn brings the queen of spades, so the flush does get there, but I hit my pair, and the small blind ends up betting out for 5k, and I'm put in kind of a weird spot. I don't know if he has some kind of queen jack or queen 9 or some other weird combo. So I decide to call, and the river brings us the 7 of hearts. So it's essentially a brick. And then the small blind decides to bet out for 10,000. And if you look at my chip stack, I'm working with about 26,000. So this is a decent part of my stack, and I'm trying to see if he has any bluffs here. And looking back on it, he really doesn't. He's just yelling that he has an ace or maybe a flush or some kind of 2 pair from the small blind. But in the moment, I decide to call. It was idiotic, and he shows that he had an ace. The next hand, we are in the big blind, and we look down at the beautiful 8-3 offsuit. So the under the gun limps, and it ends up folding around to the button, and he calls as well. Small blind decides to fold, and now that we're going 3 ways into the flop, I decide to check in the dark, mainly because there's no reason for me to be leading out or trying to play anything sneaky here. We look at the flop and we see it as 8-7-6 rainbow. So I checked in the dark, but he didn't end up seeing it. So it checks around, and the turn brings the 7 of clubs. This is definitely in my betting range now because I just limped in. This kind of board definitely hits my range more than theirs. So I bet out for 25, and they under the gun player folds, and then the dealer is sitting there thinking about it, and after a little bit of thinking, he decides to fold as well. At this point, I show my card just for fun. Yeah. On to the very next hand, we are on the button, and we look down at Queen 8 offsuit. And I don't know what it is about these Queen X hands that I enjoy playing, but for some reason I do. Not really sure why, but it folds around, I believe, the middle position and hijack call, and I decide to call as well, mainly just to hold my position. And I'm not worried about the small blind or big blind raising in this spot because Their raise frequency is pretty small, so I felt comfortable calling there. The flop brings 975 with two hearts, and when the small blind leads out for 1,000, the big blind ends up calling, and I decide to call as well because I have a gut shot and I think it's pretty disguised here. The turn brings the eight of hearts, so I end up hitting a pair, but I'm kind of cautious on how to play this. It ends up checking to me, and I decide to check. I probably could have bet, but onto the river, we see that it's the two of diamonds. At this point, the small blind leads out for 2,300, and I think he's on some kind of missed heart draw. At this point, I had completely even missed that the big blind had snap called, and I idiotically decide to flick in a call. And we see that we're outkicked by ace 8 from this small blind. So our chip stack ends up getting a pretty decent blow. This next hand, I look down at ace 6 offsuit in the hijack position, and I have to be careful on how I'm playing here with the short stack and all. It ends up folding over to me, and I decide just to call. Again, like the hand before, if it was suited, I probably would have raised more, but at this point, I'm honestly just seeing an ace, and I kind of want to hold on to it. So now that we're at the flop, we see that the flop is king 4-3 with two diamonds. So it ends up checking to me, and I decide to check as well. And the turn brings the ace of clubs. So that's the money card. I end up deciding to lead out for 1,300, and they all fold pretty quick. It's not a huge pot, but at least it's something. On to the next one, we look down at ace queen offsuit in the middle position. So definitely my first premium of the night, and with a somewhat decent position, I can get a little risky with this. So with blinds at 800, I decide to bump it up to 2,400. I think that's a pretty standard raise size with this hand in this position. And the people behind me end up folding, and I end up getting the under the gun and low jack players to call. So we are three ways heading to the flop. The flop comes king 8-7 with two clubs. So I completely miss this board, and I decide to go into kind of check fold mode. The under the gun player ends up betting out for 3,000, and at this point, I mean, that's almost half my stack. There's no point in trying to call here. And so I start picking up my chips, but I think about it more, and it's just an easy fold for me. It was tough, but it was the right play. On to the next one. You guessed it, Queen Jack offsuit. Yet another hand where I'm not suited and it's Queen X. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself, but here we are. Action ends up folding to the hijack, who ends up raising it to 1,600, and then it ends up folding to the small blind, who actually decides to go all in. And so at this point, this is a pretty easy call for me. I am short stack. I need to hit it somewhere. And with this hand, this is the perfect hand to do it. And as the dealer's counting out the chips, the hijack is thinking about it for a while. He's trying to see who has the big stack, and I had a big stack by like, I don't know, 1,500 or 2,000 or something like that. And so he ends up thinking for a while and ends up deciding on a call. So there's a lot of math trying to figure out how much is in the main and side. We actually had some problems with this afterwards based off of how it played out. But we see the news that the small blind has pocket tens and the hijack has 10-7 of clubs. So we go to the flop and we see that it's two ace queen rainbow. So I end up hitting, Turn brings the 9 of diamonds, so I'm still good, and the river the 9 of hearts. So I end up tripling up, which is massive. That was the last hand before break, and since we colored up chips, I look down and I don't have a lot here with me. So I have to be careful with how I'm playing here. So I have 2K. I've yet to look at my cards yet when the low jack ends up going all in for 8K. So I look down at ace 8 offsuit and I'm not really sure what to think here. I mean, I have to call 6K in order to win 16, and this isn't really worth the call in my opinion, and especially offsuit, it's just an easy fold. Now that we are back on the button, we look down at ace jack offsuit, and I am feeling very confident about this. It ends up folding around to me, and this is a pretty easy all in. And when the small blind folds, the big blind actually takes a really long time, not only peeling his cards, but deciding on his action too. So the longer he takes, the better I feel about if he calls, which, as you see, he ends up doing. And everyone else had folded, and we see the good news. We are up against King 10 suited. So we're ahead by a little bit. It's essentially a flip. Flop comes 3, 2, 7 with 1 heart. Turn brings the 7 of spades and the river 8 of hearts. So I got a much needed double up there. All right, after that hand, we look down at King 9 offsuit in the hijack position. And at this point, this is one of those hands that I'm not really sure where this fits in the range for hijack. I ended up deciding just to call and mainly just try and see if I can get lucky on the flop. The button decides to call as well, and the small blind folds and the big blind calls as well. So 3 ways heading to the flop, and we see that it is 8, 6, 4 with 2 diamonds. So I completely missed this flop. I'm just in check fold mode now at this point, especially since I don't have a diamond. It's just an easy fold. As our chip stack is shortly dwindling down, we look down at ace 3 of spades in the under the gun 1 position. Since we have a suited ace here, this is not really a raising hand in this spot. However, I'm trying to use my chip stack to my advantage, and I decide bumping it up to 5K. I think usually you would want ace 8, maybe ace 7 suited to be your raising hand. But when I decide to raise, the middle position, hijack, button, small blind, big blind, and under the gun players all decide to call. So it's basically a family pot at this point, and the flop brings king, queen, jack with 2 hearts. So the small blind and big blind decide to check pretty quick, but the under the gun player is taking his time thinking about things, and he ends up deciding leading out for 10K. So a pretty decent sized bet. I am kind of on the edge of jamming or just calling. Jamming, I don't think I have any merit to it, but I decide to call mainly just to kind of hope to get lucky on my 10, and maybe at the worst we're just chopping. But the turn brings the 7 of diamonds, so now I'm really in check fold mode, and that point's proven when the big blind decides to go all in. Spoiler warning for this last hand of the vlog: if you hate seeing people just punt their tournament life away, then just stop watching now, because I am not happy at all with how I played this. So, that being said, I look down at 9-7 offsuit in the small blind. And at this point, it ends up folding around to the button who calls, and I decide just to call. Not really sure why. I couldn't really tell you. Honestly, at this point, I was just on tilt. I was just kept losing pots. And when I see the flop brought a 7, I decide to just go all in. And when I do that, the big blind ended up folding, and the hijack and button are still waiting on action. The hijack does end up deciding to call, and then the button, after thinking about it, he also ends up deciding to call as well. So there's still action behind, so I'm not really feeling that great about my hand. So as the table wishes me good luck, I grab my camera, show the turn is the 2 of hearts. So that basically kills me at this point. I'm kind of hoping that maybe a 7 or a 9 can come off on the river. Maybe it'll help me, but the river's the 8 of clubs. So at this point, I've already accepted defeat, and I'm just even more on tilt with how poorly I played this hand. The other two end up deciding to check, and I just mug. If you got to this point in the video, I greatly appreciate it. If you could please like and subscribe, I would appreciate that as well. I really appreciate all the support and everything that y'all are giving me, and I can't wait to keep posting these videos. Hopefully I'll be getting a new computer setup at my house. That way I can be posting more regularly. So let's hope we get there, and I'll see y'all in the next one.